Just talking about this experience makes me feel uneasy. This encounter my brother and I had with this terrifying creature still haunts us to this day. My brother and I were never afraid of hiking or being out in the wilderness before we stumbled on this abomination. I do not want to reveal too much about our experience just yet, so I will start from the beginning. It was in the evening, about 2 hours before the sun was going to set. My brother and I decided to go on a hike. We are from Southern California. The area where we went hiking was composed mostly of small but steep rolling hills, with occasional small valleys. The hills and valleys are covered in thick, low-growing brush, and are dotted by massive old oak trees. In some valleys, the oaks were closer together, and created small patches of forest. The scenery is beautiful, yet eerie. The first hour of the hike was relatively peaceful. Since the hike is pretty hilly, we would occasionally take a few breaks at the tops of hills, and enjoy the view. It was at this point that something caught our eye. Down the hill, and further down the trail, there was a carcass of an animal. We could not tell what it was exactly, so we walked closer to go inspect it. It was a coyote carcass. Finding a carcass is rare, but isn't such a big deal. The thing that creeped us out about this coyote was the deep claw and puncture marks all over its side. Whatever killed it did not kill it for the purpose of eating it. My brother and I assumed it had been killed by another coyote in some vicious fight, or a mountain lion had attacked it, possibly over a meal. This creeped us out a little bit, but we kept going to finish our hike. Later, we came across an empty deep wash that we decided to explore. This wash had a very eerie feeling resonating from it. Before we walked inside the wash, we walked along the steep like cliff edges of it. It had rained a few days prior, and we could see the remnants of water that had just ran through the wash. We could also see how deep the rainwater had seeped through the soil. The cliffs of the wash in some spots were at least 25 to 30 feet deep. The wash was dotted with many small shrubs, and with occasional oak or birch trees. When we came across one oak tree in the wash, we saw it had a rope hanging from it. This was peculiar, so my brother and I decided to go have a closer look. This was when we went into the wash. Once we got to the bottom of it, we noticed these strange tracks that were extremely well indented because the sandy ground was still pretty damp. They were giant horse-like hoof imprints, followed by what looked like human hand imprints, but with large claws. It looked like the hoofs were in the back, and the hands were in the front. This was exceedingly odd, and we thought this had to be some sort of joke. There was no creature that would leave these types of tracks. This should have been our second sign to leave, but we just thought this had to be fake. It was so unreal. We walked further down the wash to the oak tree we saw that had the rope hanging from it. Something about that spot was extremely unsettling. Right next to the oak tree there was a tire that was almost completely buried. I guess this had been a tire swing at one point. Our curiosity was now fulfilled, and just as we were about to leave, we heard what sounded like a heart-wrenching scream. It sounded like it was coming from further down the wash. Terrified, but also confused, we decided to walk in the direction of the scream, to go make sure no one was in trouble. We walked at least another 1,000 feet, but couldn't find anyone. There were no tracks other than those we saw earlier. At this point, my brother and I felt extremely uneasy, and wanted to get the hell out of there. It was also starting to get a little bit dark. It was almost twilight outside. As we started walking back to the point we entered the wash, I felt like something was there with us. When I asked my brother if he felt the same way, he completely agreed with me. My mind just did not feel right. I just felt weighed down, and not like myself at all. From behind us, we kept hearing noises, and the bushes rattling. We kept looking back, expecting to see something, but as always, there was nothing there. Because we felt so distressed, we decided to jog. At this point, we heard what sounded like someone speaking in such an odd way. It sounded completely distorted. This made us run so much faster. We eventually found our way out of the wash, and frantically climbed back up the wall. We were so relieved to be out of there, but still wanted to get back. That wasn't even the worst part of this story. It gets far worse. Right after my brother and I climbed back up the wash wall, we saw something that made every hair on the back of our necks stand up. At first glance, I thought it was a person, until I noticed the head, and then the fur. It was walking bipedally on two legs. My brother and I could not believe our eyes at the atrocity we were staring at. I could not fathom that this was even real. At this point, it just felt like a sick, surreal dream. The feet of the creature were a twisted mix of human and goat feet. The creature's head had twisted and aberrant horns coming out of each side. The eyes of this thing were disturbingly human-like, and I felt them staring into my soul. Its face was slightly prognathic, its nose and mouth the cross of a goat's and a man's. I also noticed the creature had small pointed teeth when it opened its mouth to release a shrieking scream. My brother and I obviously started sprinting down the trail as fast as we possibly fucking could, not wanting to look back. I did not want to see that creature again. Thank God we made it out of the wash that the creature was in. After running for at least 10 minutes straight, we made it back near the trailhead. Both of us were out of breath in a panic. I just wanted to cry and get the fuck out of there. It was now dark outside, and the car was only around 100 yards away. We still felt the presence of that thing. We hopped inside of my car as fast as possible. I started the ignition, turned on the lights, and backed up. Through my headlights, I saw the reflection of the creature's eyes, back 100 yards where we just were, in the brush. This fucking thing had followed us the entire way. I stepped on the gas, and just made sure we got the hell out of there. I have no idea what this creature was my brother and I saw. We haven't really told anyone, just because we figured no one will believe us. I don't even want to bring up its memory in my head. It still haunts my dreams, but I try not to think about it. I decided to post this story here because I needed someone to share this experience with, just in case any of you have had a similar situation. I really hope none of you haven't though. My brother and I will always stay clear of washes. Alright, Wolf War Gen X, I'm gonna go ahead and type my Goatman story. I really didn't know what a Goatman was until I saw some of these stories here about it. So here's a bit of backstory. Back in 2012, we always had bonfires every night. I'm in the Marine Corps Reserves, so while I'm home, I work as an Ohio State Trooper. Anyways, a bunch of buddies and I were having a bonfire. We got everyone at my house around 7 p.m., then loaded them into our vehicles. One was a Chevy Suburban, a Jeep Wrangler, and a Ford 350. The spot where we would have our bonfire was a mile back on my land. There's this dirt path we take down to the cabin. It starts out as going in between two fields, then through the woods, then dead ends at our cabin, which overlooks a creek that eventually dumps into the Scotio River. We had about 24 people packed into our 3 vehicles, and shit, the Suburban is mine. So we set off. Driving through the woods wasn't a big deal. But as soon as we got to the area, I stepped out of my vehicle, and I could smell this god-awful smell. Death. It smelled like death. Like an animal of some sort was rotting in the woods somewhere. Everyone else said they could smell it too, but didn't think anything of it. Maybe a dead deer, or something that someone shot, and couldn't find. It was the end of September, so hunting season had just started. I started the fire and didn't think too much about the smell. We all eventually got used to it. We played beer pong, and I had a generator going to power the cabin. So my friend of mine, Ryan, had been telling me that the girl I had brought with me kept asking shit about me to him, saying how much of a gentleman I was, so I knew that night I was going to get laid. Fuck yes. Anyways, the fire was dying down, so Ryan was gonna go get wood with a few buddies of mine. I had them take a radio with them to radio me if they needed help. The fire started getting real low. It had been about 30 minutes since they had left. "Hey, where the fuck you guys at?" I asked over the radio. "Dude, chill. I'm on my way," Ryan responded. They came back later with a ton of wood, and I got the fire going again. Then it eventually started to get late. People wanted to start going home, so after everyone left, only 8 of us remained. The girl I liked, Sarah, Ryan, and another guy named David, plus 3 other girls. David, the other guy, and the girls were wasted as fuck, and were all flirting with each other. I continued to chill at the fire with Sarah and Ryan, talking about random stuff. It started to get real late, and around 2 a.m. is when the 3 girls, David, and the other guy, went to go lay down in the cabin. Sarah and I stayed outside and talked for a while. Eventually, we started making out. I stopped when I heard this cracking sound outside. I looked over and could make out a figure walking around near the tree line. "Hey you, what are you doing over there?" I asked. "Dude, chill. I'm on my way," the figure responded. It sounded like Ryan, but I swore Ryan had been in the cabin. Maybe he had walked out when I was occupied, but it didn't make sense. "What?" I asked. "Dude, chill. I'm on my way," it responded again. My hair started to raise up on my neck. "The fuck?" Sarah responded. "Sarah, go inside and wake everyone up," I told her. She didn't hesitate. I walked over to my SUV and popped the trunk and grabbed an AR-15. For some reason, I was shaking, and the death smell was back again. "What the fuck?" I whispered to myself, shoving a mag into the rifle and sitting around in the chamber. I walked around the SUV to where I saw the figure in the woods and couldn't see it. About this time, Ryan walked out of the cabin and looked at me like I was fucking stupid. "Dude, why do you have a gun?" he asked. "Were you out in the woods?" I asked him. He told me he had just woken up and had no idea what I was talking about. I told him to take everyone back to their cars and come back with me. I told him to take everyone back to their cars and come back with a gun. He got everyone into my SUV and drove off. I sat there by the fire for a while, looking around me. I had a spotlight by my side, the 1,000,000 candle-watt power ones. I couldn't help but thinking someone was playing a trick on me, but living 8 miles away from a prison, I can't really be too sure. The death smell was starting to almost get repugnant. I felt almost like gagging. I heard something walking through the woods again. I grabbed the spotlight and stood up. I waited for a moment, and I saw it again. The figure walked out of the woods and stood there, looking at me. I flipped on the light at it. Its back was turned towards me, staring into the woods. "Hey, I got a fucking gun. You might want to tell me who the fuck you are before I lay your ass out right now." Not a single word came out of the person's mouth. "Motherfucker," I whispered to myself. I started to walk closer. "Dude, why do you have a gun?" the person asked. "Because..." I stopped mid-sentence. I started to think about what it said, and what Ryan said. It was mimicking Ryan. It repeated it again. This time, it sounded just like Ryan. I raised the rifle and sighted on the guy. "Ryan?" I asked. Its neck shifted a bit, then twitched its whole body. It looked unnatural. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about the man looked wrong. I heard music playing in the background, and I could see the headlights coming through the woods. "Who are you?" I asked. The figure turned around and looked at me. Its facial features were off. It looked like the other guy that was with Ryan. But its voice sounded just like Ryan's, and it started to stare at me with its mouth gaped open. "Who the fuck are you?" I shouted, flipping my rifle off safe. Something in the fire snapped and made a loud noise, so I flipped around to see what was behind me, then snapped back to where the person was standing. It was gone. "Fuck," I shouted around looking for him. About this time, Ryan was parking the Suburban and getting out and putting a pistol back in his waistband. "Dude, what's going on?" he asked. I started to fill him in on everything, then asked him if everyone was with him. He told me everyone in the cabin was in that SUV, the other guy, Sarah, and the 3 girls. We sat by the fire and started waiting. The death smell had went away for the time being. It was around 4 a.m. now. Sunlight should be coming up in just a few hours. At about this time, the death smell had come back, this time, stronger than ever, to the point where Ryan gagged and almost threw up. I got up and looked around, waiting to see the figure again. A few moments passed, then I could see something on the ground, coming out of the woods. I turned on my spotlight and shined it on the figure. The man, who I had seen before, was on the ground rolling around. "What the fuck is that?" Ryan asked, pulling his pistol out. We both stared at the man roll around for a good couple of minutes, then stopped and laid there on the ground. After a while, Ryan and I went into the cabin. The fire outside illuminated the figure through the window on the door. I could see it standing there, twitching. Sunrise started to come, and I could see the figure walk away from the cabin. I ran up and opened the door and walked outside. By this time, the sun was starting to come up, but it was still hard to see anything outside except for the man. The man was walking towards the woods, twitching and shaking. "Hey!" I shouted. drawing my rifle on the man. The figure stopped and looked at me. I fired a round straight into its head. "Fuck you," I shouted, and kept a bead on him, waiting for the twitching to stop. What happened next, I couldn't explain. The man stood up and started walking to the woods like nothing happened. I lowered my rifle and watched as he made it to the tree line and turn around and look at us. I didn't see any wound from him, nothing. His face was completely untouched. The death smell went away. I couldn't smell it anymore. The man smiled at us and walked into the woods again. By that time, we ran to the SUV and got the fuck out of there. We never spoke of what happened to anyone. In fear, they think we were mental. I've been back to the place countless times now, but I cannot seem to smell the death smell or see anything unusual anymore. I'm not sure if the Goatman, Skinwalker, ghost thing has gone away or it's moved somewhere else. Who knows? I'm a search and rescue officer for the U.S. Forest Service. I have some stories to tell. A lot of my less outdoorsy friends want to know if I've ever seen the Goatman while I've been out on calls. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, I've never had anything quite like that happen. I guess the closest thing was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't see anything. However, there was one call where I had something kind of similar happen, but I'm not sure if I'm willing to chalk it up to the Goatman. We got in a report that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails and needed assistance going back down to the main area. We hike up to where she's at, and her husband is just beside himself. He runs, well, I guess more jogs to us, and tells us that he was a little ways off the trail looking at something when his wife starts screaming behind him. He runs back to her, and she's passed out on the trail. We get her on a backboard, and as we're getting her down to the welcome center, she comes to and starts screaming again. I calm her down and ask her what happened. I can't remember verbatim what she said, but essentially what happened was this. She'd been waiting for her husband when she started hearing this really strange sound. She said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow, and she couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try to hear it better, and it sounded like it was coming closer. She said the closer it got, the more uneasy she was, until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part, because it was so weird that I don't think I could forget it if I tried. This is what she said. It wasn't a cat, it was a man, saying the word meow over and over. Just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that. I thought my hearing aid was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted it, and it still sounded all buzzy. It was pretty awful. He was coming closer, but I couldn't see him. And the closer he got, the more scared I was. And the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. I guess that's why I fainted. Once she told me that story, I was a little perplexed as to why a guy would be out in the fucking woods, chanting meow, meow at people. So once we get down the mountain, I tell my superior that I'm gonna go search the area to see if I can find anything. He gives me the go-ahead, and I grab a radio and hike back to where she fainted. I don't see anyone, so I keep going about a mile more. And when I head back, I go off trail to see if I can figure out where she saw him coming from. It's almost sunset at this point, and I don't have any desire to be out at night alone, so I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to go check it out again tomorrow. But as I'm headed back, I start to hear something in the distance. I stop and call out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound didn't come closer or get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying meow, meow, in this really odd, monotone sound. As comical as it makes it sound, it was almost like that guy on South Park with the electrolarynx, Ned. I go off the trail in the direction I think it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's almost like it's coming from all directions. Eventually, it just sort of fades out, and I ended up going back to the Welcome Center. I didn't get any further reports like that, and even though I went back to that area, I never heard that same exact sound again. I suppose it could have been some stupid kid out there fucking with people, but even I have to admit, it was weird. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Oh yeah, and one last thing. Stay spooky, my friends.